Assalamu alaikum, good morning. The young women and men who brought this conference together, congratulations for doing a phenomenal job. To the delegates who have come from far and near, and honored guests, it is my opportunity to thank you for including me to participate in this very dynamic and a kind of very evolving conversation that has been going on since yesterday. I came prepared to give an academic paper, but after yesterday's session, I rethought what a paper for this audience should look like. So this is really a draft of some ideas, which I'll have to improve over time, so bear with me. As I stand before you today, I'm filled with both hope and deep concern. A year ago, we witnessed something extraordinary taking place in Bangladesh, as people like me who have been studying Bangladesh for many years watched it from the US. Once again, the people of Bangladesh rose to reshape their destiny. The courage, the sacrifice, the determination of ordinary citizens revealed yet again that the spirit of this land is unbreakable. But as a historian who has spent years listening to those who lived through earlier moments of transformation, I must ask the question that haunts me: what happens next? This is not the first time Bangladesh has remade itself. In 1947, your grandparents and great-grandparents chose freedom from colonialism. In 1971, your parents fought a brutal war for liberation. In 1991, you overthrew a dictatorship, and in 2024, you rose once more to reject what had failed you. Each time was a triumph, each time was celebrated as a new dawn, but each time the dawn faded. Promises were made but not fulfilled, wounds were opened but not healed, and because the work of reckoning was not done or left unfinished, you were forced to rise again and again. This is my plea to you today. Do not let this moment slip into that same cycle. For too long, you have allowed others to define your history. The Indian narrative speaks of 1947 as partition, as if some ancient unified Akhand Bharat was dismembered by the creation of Pakistan. This is not your story, and you must stop accepting it as such. For the people of East and West Pakistan, 1947 was not partition. It was the end of colonialism, throwing off the yoke of masters who had exploited your labor, extracted your wealth, and denied you dignity. When your parents and grandparent generation chose Pakistan in 1947, they were choosing freedom from that exploitation. This matters because how you understand 1947 shapes how you understand everything that followed. If you see 1947 as a mistake, as a partition of some imagined unity, then 1971 becomes a correction of that mistake. If you see 1947 as a legitimate assertion of your rights to self-determination, then 1971 becomes something different, a correction not of 1947, but of the betrayal. Pakistan promised that the people of this new state, of this new nation state, will finally have their voices heard, their needs met, and their dignity respected, and they would all be equal citizens. Instead, you found yourself colonized again, this time not by British masters and powerful zamindars of Calcutta, but by West Pakistani elites who treated the people of East Pakistan as subjects rather than partners. They exploited your labor, extracted your resources, diminished your language, and when you protested, they sent the military to silence you. The violence of 1971 was not inevitable. It was the product of West Pakistan's failure to honor the promise that brought Pakistan into being. When the people of East Pakistan voted for Awami League in 1970, they were not voting for separation. They were voting for the fulfillment of Pakistan's founding promise. It was West Pakistan's refusal to accept this democratic verdict that made 1971 necessary. But here's what we must understand about 1971. It was not just a political liberation, it was a moral reckoning. The violence that preceded your independence was so devastating that it forced everyone, survivors, perpetrators, and witnesses, to confront a fundamental question of what it means to be human. Over 6 years of research, I have listened to testimonies from all sides of the conflict. I have heard from women whose bodies became battlefields, who were designated as Birangona, yet found that this official recognition often silenced rather than honored their individual experiences. I have sat with families who lost their children, their aged parents, and sometimes almost all the family members in the liberation war, yet whose grief remains unacknowledged because no one was willing to listen to them. I have also listened to perpetrators, Pakistani soldiers, who carried out violence that they now struggle to understand. So many of them have shared with me their pain of the loss of their humanity and the struggle to regain it. Like Muhammad, a soldier I met in Lahore, told me of this transformative experience as a human that happened as a prisoner of war in India. Waha insan bana, I became a human there. Not because his captors were so kind to him, but because he finally had to confront what he had done. He had to see his victims as people like himself. These testimonies taught me something profound. Even under conditions of extreme dehumanization, people retain the capacity for moral choices. Even perpetrators can recover their humanity. Even survivors, despite unimaginable trauma, can choose healing over hatred. But here is the crucial point. This recovery of humanity, what people call insaniyat, was not automatic. It required acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It required seeing the other as human. It required, above all, listening to the voices that the powerful try to defy and silence. And yet, what happened after 1971? Victory became its own form of silence. The stories of heroes and villains, clean narrative of history, obscured the complex moral realities that survivors actually experienced. You elevated the courage of freedom fighters, and rightly so, but struggled to acknowledge the ongoing trauma of rape survivors, the grief of families of the disappeared, the complex feelings of those who had supported Pakistan and now had to find their place in Bangladesh as stateless. This is what I call stratified silences, layered acts of forgetting that serve political projects rather than truth and healing. Every nation does it, and Bangladesh too. You celebrate liberation while struggling to acknowledge the liberation's promises have remained unfulfilled for many of your own people, particularly those in the Mufassil areas. And so the pattern repeats. The hope of 1947 gave the way for the necessity of 1971. The promise of 1971 gave way to military dictatorship and the necessity of 1991. The democracy of 1991 became increasingly autocratic, necessitating the revolt of 2024. Each time you have done and had to start all over again because of the failure to complete the work that the previous moment began. Today we see the devastating consequences of this failure to heal. In Assam, where I'm originally from, nearly 2 million Bengali-speaking Muslims, many of whose families had lived there for generations, having migrated from mostly the Mymensingh and Pabna area in the British period have been now reduced to non-citizens through Indian National Register of Citizens, NRC, and the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. They are called termites and Bangladeshi infiltrators from 1971. Families are being torn apart, people are dying in detention camps, and an entire community is being systematically dehumanized. This should horrify you, that not because they are your Bengali brothers and sisters, but because it reveals how the unresolved trauma of 1947 and 1971 continue to generate new forms of violence. This is what happens when societies don't heal. The trauma gets passed down, recycled, weaponized against new victims. But we cannot simply blame others for weaponizing history. We must ask, have we done the work necessary to ensure that our own unhealed traumas don't get passed down to the next generation? A year after 2024 revolution, I see troubling signs that there is a repetition of familiar patterns. There is much talk of new beginnings and little discussion how the previous beginnings failed. There are calls for national unity, but unity achieved by silencing difficult questions is not unity, it is postponement. I see the same tendencies that have been marked by previous transitions, to rush to create heroes and villains, the reluctance to acknowledge complexity, the performance of triumphant narratives for difficult truths. I see elevation of some violence and the marginalization of some voices and marginalization of others. I see the promise that this time finally will build the Bangladesh that our martyrs died for without serious reflection of why the same promise is made over and over again. If you continue this pattern, what will happen? The hope of 2024 will gradually give way to frustration. The excluded will remain excluded, the grievances will fester, and eventually a new generation will have to rise up and start again. Your children and grandchildren will have to finish the revolution, perhaps not even finish, because this generation failed to complete the work that was started. So what does the path look like ahead? I'll just give you a few because I'm running out of time. So I'll just, in very, very short, 1 or 2 sentences, tell you something that I see. That first, create civic spaces for difficult conversation. Second, reform the history that is taught to people. Third, confront exclusionism inside your own society. Fourth, build a new economy and institution that serve not only the privileged, but also the underprivileged, particularly in rural areas. Fifth, engage your neighbors, India and Pakistan, not through hostility or dependency, but with recognition of shared vulnerability. Your freedom is tied to theirs, even if they have once denied it. Friends, you have made 2024 has already been proven by your courage. The revolution is the easy part. Breaking what is broken needs passion. Yesterday we heard about it. You can dream. Building what lasts requires patience. It requires not only the fire to tear it down, but the wisdom to lay foundations. And I learned this particularly living in the desert of Arizona. Patience. It requires guidance, most importantly, of moral conduct that dignifies the human and the human capacity to be ethical. In other words, it needs an usul. The survivors of 1971 showed us that dignity and ethics were possible even in devastation. Their examples call us now, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. The question before you is not whether you can change. You have done it repeatedly. The question is whether you can sustain change, whether you can build something so rooted in justice and insaniyat that your children will not need another revolution. The choice is yours. The time is now. The voices of 1971 are calling you to courage. I hope you will answer. Thank you.